The scream that tore through the elegant foyer of the Richardson mansion wasn't one of joy or surprise, it was pure, primal terror. 12-year-old Marcus dropped his backpack, his face draining of all color as he pointed a trembling finger at the woman standing nervously by the front door, clutching a small suitcase and wearing a simple black uniform. "Daddy, she's the woman who left me to die," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking with the weight of memories too heavy for a child to bear. "She's the one. She's the one who walked away." David Richardson, a successful tech entrepreneur who had built his fortune from nothing, felt his world tilt on its axis. The woman before him, Maria Santos, according to her employment application, stood frozen, her dark eyes filling with tears as she stared at the boy who had just shattered her composure completely. I can explain," Maria whispered, her accented English barely audible above Marcus's continued protests. 3 years earlier, Maria Santos had been driving home from her second job as a night shift cleaner when she spotted the overturned car on the deserted mountain road. Rain pounded her windshield as she pulled over, her hands shaking as she dialed 911. Inside the wreckage, she found 9-year-old Marcus, conscious but trapped, his mother already gone. She stayed with him, holding his small hand through the twisted metal, whispering prayers in Spanish and English, promising him everything would be okay. But when the sirens grew closer, something inside Maria broke. She was undocumented, had been for 15 years since overstaying her visa, and she knew what would happen if the authorities found her at the scene. Her own 3 children back in her tiny apartment depended on her income. If she was deported, they would have nothing. So she did something that would haunt her every single day for 3 years. So she squeezed Marcus's hand one last time, told him to be brave, and disappeared into the storm before the paramedics arrived. Now, standing in the marble foyer of his father's mansion, Marcus's accusations hung in the air like a death sentence. David looked between his traumatized son and the woman who was supposed to help care for their home, trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't understand. "Marcus, what are you talking about?" David asked gently, kneeling beside his son. The boy had been through extensive therapy after losing his mother in that accident, but he'd never mentioned anyone else being there. "She was there, Dad. At Mum's accident. She held my hand and told me help was coming, but then she left me alone in the dark." Marcus's words tumbled out between sobs. "I waited for her to come back, but she never did." Maria sank into the nearest chair, her carefully constructed new life crumbling around her. After 3 years of saving every penny, she had finally gotten her immigration status sorted through a church sponsorship program. She had taken this job hoping for a fresh start, never imagining she would come face to face with the child she had abandoned in his darkest hour. "It's true," she said quietly, looking directly at David. "I was there. I held your son's hand for 20 minutes while we waited for help, and then I ran away like a coward." The silence that followed was deafening. David felt anger rising in his chest, to anger at this woman who had left his injured child alone, anger at the universe for putting them in this impossible situation. But as he looked at Maria, he saw something that gave him pause. This wasn't the face of someone callous or cruel. This was the face of someone carrying an unbearable burden. "Why?" David asked simply. Maria's story poured out of her undocumented status, her fear of deportation, her 3 children who would have been left with nothing. She spoke of the guilt that consumed her, how she had donated money anonymously to the children's hospital where Marcus was treated, how she had followed his recovery from afar through newspaper articles about David's charitable donations in his late wife's name. "I know you will never forgive me," Maria said, standing to leave. "I understand. I will go." But it was Marcus who spoke next, his young voice cutting through the tension. "Did you really stay with me in the car?" Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "You were so brave, my Joe. You told me about your favorite superhero, about your dog Max, about how your mama made the best pancakes. You kept talking even though you were hurt, and that's how I knew you were going to be okay." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. The raw terror began mixing with confusion, then recognition of a different sort. "You sang to me," he whispered. "That song in Spanish." "Las Matilda plus minus Anitas," Maria confirmed. "My grandmother used to sing it to me when I was scared." David watched his son grapple with emotions far too complex for a 12-year-old. The woman who had become the symbol of abandonment in Marcus's mind was also the person who had provided comfort in his most terrifying moment. Over the following weeks, David found himself in an impossible position. His instinct was to protect his son, to remove this reminder of trauma from their lives. But he also saw how Maria worked with quiet dedication, never asking for anything extra, always putting others' needs first. He watched her interact with Marcus from a distance, never pushing, but always available with a gentle word or a band-aid when he scraped his knee. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday evening. Marcus had been struggling with nightmares again, and David found him sitting at the kitchen window, watching the storm. Maria was there too, quietly preparing tomorrow's lunch. "The rain still scares me," Marcus admitted to no one in particular. Maria paused in her work. "Me too," she said softly. "Every time it storms, I think about that night. I think about whether I made the right choice." "Did you?" Marcus asked, turning to look at her directly for the first time since that first day. Maria sat down across from him, choosing her words carefully. "I made the choice that kept my children safe. But it was wrong to leave you alone, even for those few minutes. I have regretted it every day since." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "I wasn't completely alone. I remembered your song." That night, David made a decision that would change all their lives. He sat down with Marcus and had a long conversation about forgiveness, about the complicated choices adults sometimes have to make, and about the difference between abandonment and circumstance. "She stayed when she could have just driven past," David told his son. "And she's here now, even knowing how much it would hurt to face you again." 6 months later, Maria Santos wasn't just their housekeeper, she was family. Her own children had joined their household, bringing laughter and chaos that had been missing since David's wife died. Marcus learned Spanish songs and taught Maria's youngest daughter to skateboard. The house that had felt like a monument to loss became a home filled with the beautiful mess of a blended family. On the anniversary of the accident, they visited the memorial David had erected for his wife. Maria placed flowers and whispered her own prayer of gratitude, not for the tragedy, but for the second chance that came after. Marcus stood beside her, no longer seeing the woman who left him, but the woman who had found her way back. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage aren't about staying, they're about having the strength to return and face the consequences of the choices we made when we were afraid. Love, they learned, isn't perfect, but it's persistent, and in the end, that's what matters most.